Sometimes it can be hard to describe what makes things scary, especially on a replay. All the footage you're seeing is from subsequent replays of the game, and I still found myself jumping and on edge for most of it, sometimes even during moments when I wasn't before. Mostly thanks to the girl. Her appearance is in that sweet spot of abstract and grounded, so we can still get the sense we're fighting against a concrete creature, and the way her arms and legs contort to travel into the ceiling makes her feel unpredictable, and like a foe that's thinking on its feet as much as you are. The game opens with a simple hide-and-seek scenario that makes Grace and the player start from zero. Having you run away from an invincible monster is nothing new for Resident Evil, but the way this game adds a new twist to it is Leon killing it. This scene is one of the few he shares with Grace that feels like it's really maximizing the potential of old and new game forces coming together. Grace gets to see the seasoned Leon take out this terrifying monster like nothing. It gives her, and you the player, a goalpost to help Grace achieve. You have to find a way to bring Grace to the same place Leon has been since RE4. It's a very clever start to this game, giving you and Grace a thirst for revenge, and a chance to prove that you can play as a character who begins equipped with nothing. A thirst that the game tries to quench with Leon's chainsaw antics. Letting your frustration out on the clinic employees and allowing you to use a weapon that terrorized you in previous games. Leon's segments, at least for the first half of the game, are designed to be an abreaction from Grace's segments. But despite this being some decent fun, the idea is strange to me. Resident Evil is a series all about the difference between fear and triumph. You might start out the game weak and unfit for the environment that you're about to enter, but you'll be constantly growing not only your equipment and resources, but also your confidence. That linear progression, not just in the game, but between repeated playthroughs, is what makes Resident Evil so special and unique. So to think that for the first time we need to switch between two characters with two distinct playstyles to get that feeling, that we need to interrupt the natural progression with this violent exercise, is peculiar and a little craven. It's like watching a movie, but every 20 minutes it cuts to the end before returning to chronological order. But I think these sections are short enough to be sweet pace breakers, and they provide a cute bit of variety to the game. Despite what I just said, Leon's segments don't outlast our welcome to feel more than a wholesome homage to previous Resis. You can just see the seeds I'm planting for criticism, but just you wait. Brace's segment in the care center mimics the puzzle box mazes the rest of the series has, meaning it's excellent. A unique and very fitting mechanic this game introduces to make the care center its own place is the blood collector. In pretty much every game before 4, Resident Evil made a giant point about enemy drops, that being their absence. Defeating enemies didn't net any sort of physical reward. You would kill a zombie only to get it out of your way and keep a path you use consistently clear. Village had a bunch of resources you could collect from enemies. I can't think of a time I eliminated a normal one and I didn't get something, whether it was ammo or currency, but that was the game that was a little more actiony and deserving of those kind of drops. So Requiem is the first horror resi game to provide a reward for taking on normal enemies, a decision that could have disturbed the perfect combat equilibrium other RE games had, but I think Requiem gets away with this because of a bunch of little compounding factors, between enemies' health, their damage output, and the congested environments you're put in. You want to avoid them less than you take them head on. However, like a lot of Resident Evil games' normal difficulties, I think that it's a little too easy. Maybe it's just me, but these games always feel like they're halfway on stage when it comes to their difficulty. We see the upper half of its body, a game that promises tense and exhilarating decision making, where only the most considered planning and resource management will keep you from death. And then the bottom half is waiting to be blown off and will crumble as soon as you start using your most explosive weapons. I always feel like by the end of these games I have way more resources than I'm supposed to and could have just cast aside any pretense of resource management. To clarify, the majority of this review discusses the game as it is in its default difficulty, which I think is fair because you can't select Insanity mode without beating the game at least once. All the footage you'll be seeing will be from normal difficulty until spoken otherwise. However, Requiem does manage to get closest to not just having to masquerade its tension, but actually achieve it, especially in the basement section, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. There are a lot of moments where you have to make difficult choices between expending resources and husbanding them. Take this encounter with this zombie secretary early in the game. You could try to shimmy around her, but unless you have a knife on hand or considerable dexterity, then you're going to take some damage. Of course, if you do use the knife, then that knife is going to be lost until she's downed. You might be tempted to down her because of the cramped space here and how you'll probably be coming back, whether it's to go to the safe or to get the moon quartz. But if you do that, you'll only be clearing that hall for a limited time because she could turn into a blisterhead, an enemy that will destroy you unless you're willing to use one of the scarce magnum bullets. Maybe you take the in-between route. Choose to stand your ground and line up a headshot, or a knee shot, so Grace can knock them over. But that still uses resources alongside a higher risk of missing the shot and you still having to deal with that enemy later. The only way to circumvent any bullet usage without giving yourself up to the hitbox realm is to use one of the hemolytic injectors that you're going to have to craft using specific resources. And even more, if you use the hemolytic injectors, then the enemy won't drop any blood. It's these kinds of decisions that make Resi the series that it is, and I'm happy to say that out of every game, I think this one has my favorite decision-making processes. I still think it's too easy, but not as much as other games. And of course, there are ways to exploit and avoid these decisions on the subsequent playthroughs, especially with the right resources conserved, but that's very Resi too. It's just another way of showing how much more confident you've grown since your first time playing the game, just like Grace has since waking up in the clinic. And I can't lie, coming back to these areas as Leon and tearing it apart, unlike Grace's considered and stealthy approach, is exhilarating. What I'm trying to say is that additions like the Blood Collector are just another naturally fitting element to the RE gameplay loop and doesn't disrupt the classic systems. It's a resource that you can only carry a limited amount of unless you use upgrades. Even more, the animation that plays when collecting blood, at least in first-person mode, obscures your view of other enemies and isn't easy to cancel. It's like the spiritual successor to reloading from RE4 Classic. Every game since 6 has removed all the risk from reloading, but RE9 brings that tension back, if only a little bit in specific scenarios. Having to carry Emily through the East Wing also adds another element to the equation that somehow references RE4. If you opt out of clearing the enemies in the East Wing, do you believe you'll be able to make it without a scratch? It's a subtle callback to the escort missions with Ashley, but instead of going in blind to try and make space for you and her, you're knowingly coming back somewhere you've been before, with or without a plan in mind on how to get your partner through safely. The basement is meant to check how well you've conserved your resources, with so many enemies at the fulcrum waiting to become blisterheads. This is where you're rewarded for finding ways to keep blood in the care center. Now you're going to have to do your best to gather as many hemolytic injectors as you can, and using the Magnum isn't a very good option either because now the girl has returned and is back on the prowl, and the only way to deter her without stealth is to shoot her with your Magnum ammo. Bits like the processing plant are also good tests of how far your dexterity has come, whether it's shimmying around zombies or headshotting them. Despite being very linear compared to the care center, this section makes up for that in the amount of clever tests it puts upon the player and Grace. While I think I would have liked it a bit more if Grace was still able to get the star quartz before Emily was snatched, and had to make the selfless choice of rescuing her, it's still endearing the way she literally leaps into darkness. It's that sort of Ethan Winters selflessness that the series has recognized provides a strong attraction for its lead characters. It gets you on the same page as them. Just like Ethan, you, the player, have a lot of chances to call it quits and give up, but you keep pressing on whether it's for Rose or whatever reason you enjoy playing these games. RE9 drops it a bit with moments like these, but nonetheless the effect is similar, if fainter. Even later in the story, Grace's compassion, while considerably muted, is still there and makes you want to sympathize with her. Oh man, are we nearly at Raccoon City already? I feel like I need to stall a bit more. Okay. Rapid fire list of things that I couldn't cleanly fit into the script go. The opening. A lot of modern Resi games have these walkie-talkie segments at the beginning that make replays a bit of a drag, and while I still don't like these, this one is probably my favorite. It marvels in graphical and environmental detail. I really like how if you walk into pedestrians, they'll give you a little side-eye. The virus. I love the virus in this game. Not only the way its victims slowly and grotesquely mutate, but how they're able to keep their pre-mutation quirks. Like the guy who keeps turning the light on and off, the singing ladies that everybody loves, and this woman that just kisses this man for some reason. Okay, that's a bit weird. I'm gonna ignore that. Leon's fight at the beginning. I didn't want to talk about this because it's also a part of that beginning before the beginning segment, but honestly, as far as a lot of the encounters Leon has with zombies throughout the game, this is one of the better ones. Not only do the cars provide a high ground for Leon to obtain, but also a wall for you to do some of the rarer takedowns with axe and melee moves. What I really love is how it raises Leon's status in a very natural way. Leon used to operate alone and out of the public eye. Leon, despite eating BOWs for breakfast, hasn't gotten much recognition from the public for his service to humanity and for saving the world most of the time. And don't get pedantic, I haven't watched any of the movies, so if stuff happens there, I don't know about it. The point is that Leon is always at the aftermath of a crisis. So to see him in the middle of one, to have cars nearly run him and his enemies over, people run in fear from threats we faced hundreds of times, it's a little affirming after so much you've been through with the guy. Might honestly be the most heartwarming thing involving him in this game, but we'll get to that later. Grace and her actor's performance. I think we can all agree that the performance put on by Grace's actor, Angela Santalbano, is probably the most consistent part of the game. Her acting is top notch, definitely the best performer of the series so far, and Grace is absolutely the most immediately fleshed out protagonist in any RE game. She's awkward and sometimes scared, but not in a cringy or unrealistic way, and she's capable of making a lot of smart, on the fly decisions to get out of sticky situations. Good stuff. In general, I think this game has some of the best voice acting in the series, and out of every game, I think this is the only one where I can be assured that the actors were in the same room together when recording. What else is there? Uh, did you know that the roulette wheel will always land on one of three numbers and there's a reward for shooting one of them before spinning? No? Okay, I guess I have to talk about the rest of the game now, alright? Extreme spoiler warning ahead. I mentioned how the seeds were sown so well at the beginning for a compelling moment where Grace proves her growth with a fight against the girl. And the cutscenes do try to imply that, but your final confrontation with her at the water treatment plant is such a wet conclusion. There's way too much Magnum ammo given to you here, and way too many safe havens. If Magnum ammo was adjusted in a way so you could only have 3 bullets or so going into the battle, then there would be a lot more tension. But the game gives you 5 bullets to use on top of whatever you brought with you. Couple that with how easy it is to find light on the treatment level, and you have a segment that makes the girl lose a lot of the intimidation she had in the care center in the basement. So you think that I'm going to talk about Xeno now, but no, not yet, because I have another piece of business to discuss. Grace's character assassination. I mentioned how much I liked her before, and it wasn't like she was some outstanding protagonist as far as video games go, but for a Capcom video game, she's pretty good. So let me ask you, dear viewer and supposed player of the game, why does Grace join up with Victor and Zeno? Because I genuinely don't know. The game implies that she's looking for answers, and Zeno promises that. However, this contradicts what just happened in the story. This breakup with Leon that Grace has is framed as a big shift for her. She's not trusting authority or other people anymore and wants to do things her own way. This could have been a setup for some good drama between Leon and Grace that we could have seen explored in the second half. Leon is the tired old generation, willing to accept his failures and has experience with coping mechanisms and grief. Grace is the new generation, not willing to let people die on her watch no matter how far gone they may seem or what people tell her. Both perspectives are valid and understandable and could have led to some serious juicy drama, but Grace gives this up in the time she takes to walk upstairs. The game seems to be saying that Grace not trusting Leon means now she can only trust Victor and Zeno, the whole enemy of my enemy is my friend thing. But Victor has been trying to kill you the entire game. Also, if Grace was so important to Victor and Zeno's plans, why was she ever in any danger? Why did he leave her tied up in a wing of the clinic where there was a giant cannibal crawling around? Why did he turn everyone into zombies before Grace left? Why even turn everybody into zombies? Just blow the whole place up. If you wanted Grace to not trust Leon and get to Raccoon City, then you could do that without her devolving into a key item for Zeno. This also could have led to a new dynamic for a Resi protagonist. Lots of RE games, even the more claustrophobic and isolated ones, will still have the protagonist receive some kind of help or a companion. The most remote story for any Resi was probably Village, but even then you still had the Duke. Grace exploring Raccoon City, where both she and the city have been abandoned by the world entirely on her own, no companions or merchants, would have been sick. What I'm trying to say is that this development isn't even a development. It's a breakup makeup scenario, where we don't even get to see the other half of the relationship. Grace spends the next 4 hours off screen contributing nothing to the plot. Leon doesn't even reflect on the decision Grace made. We don't even get to see his reaction to her joining up with Zeno. This is character derailment. I don't know what to tell you. It's embarrassing how they couldn't keep a character consistent in their first game ever. Okay, now we can talk about Xeno. I'm not someone who thinks that stories, especially ones in gamey games, need to be taken super seriously. Doubly so for Resident Evil. This was a series that started as the corniest thing ever, intentionally or not, but since then has committed to that tone. Between the releases of RE2 and Code Veronica came Silent Hill, a horror game that had some light-hearted, cheesy elements, but ultimately was draped in a dour, macabre mood. Resident Evil made the conscious choice to be silly at least after 1. It wasn't a mistake or product of its time. To deny Resident Evil's roots as a parody of cheesy horror films is stupid, don't get me wrong. But that doesn't mean we can't expect more from this series. We all love RE4, but should that game's success and enjoyment despite an absence of any coherent plot be used as an excuse for when a game in the series also lacks a coherent plot? No, I don't think so. We should want our games to be the best they can be, and there's no reason why we can't get a Resi that has great gameplay and great story, as long as we pretend those things are independent. Wesker coming back as a clone has a lot of problems that you can skirt around with this whole Resident Evil isn't a story-focused game mentality, but even if you do ignore the absurdity of his introduction, Xeno is an entirely negative presence in the game. He fails in pretty much every way as a character and antagonist that I have to wonder if it was intentional. First things first, I'm not a Resi lore buff and I didn't play RE6 before this game, so I was completely blindsided by all the clone stuff. You might say that because I didn't play RE6, it's my fault that I think all this clone stuff comes out of nowhere. My argument against that is A, Resi games have had lore recaps built into their games before, and this one didn't for some reason. B, I think there's a bit of hubris if you expect me to play the most negatively received mainline Resident Evil game just for lore. And C, there was nothing in the game prior to this that hinted at any clone shenanigans. Take a twist like the one at the end of RE8. It makes sense not only in the context of every game in the series, but also within the game itself. You're shocked by the twist, but it doesn't feel like an ass pull. It feels like a sensible revelation. This is silly and depressing. Depressing in how little confidence Capcom had in this title's original villain Victor. He had the stage presence and villain rapport with Grace and Leon to carry him through the whole game. Even in the latter half of the game, he still has a bit of that villain charisma to match Leon's heroic charisma, but that's overshadowed by Xeno's cowardly existence. All of this so far, and I haven't even begun to talk about Xeno himself, but that's because there's nothing to talk about. Xeno is just Wesker with a white color scheme. Maybe I could accept and form a distinct attachment to this character if his design and voice were substantially different, but they're not. He looks like Wesker, he sounds like Wesker, and he acts like Wesker. It becomes very difficult to distinguish the two in your head. We don't get any of his backstory and can only parse his origins as a clone of Wesker, meaning he's a redundancy. Maybe there could have been some drama about how Grace and Wesker both deal with being a clone, but nope. But I think what everyone can agree upon, and what is probably the most nonsensical choice to branch out of Wesker's return, is that you don't get to fight him. You get to see him and Leon throw down in cutscenes, and it looks cool, but any sort of boss fight with Xeno is non-existent. You're going to go through all the effort of bringing back Wesker and have him meet Leon for the first time. Why make him just ride in helicopters and get decapitated? This is like if in Rise of Skywalker, Palpatine is resurrected, but before the final confrontation, he's killed by Kylo Ren, and now Rey has to duke it out with him. By this point, I don't care about Kylo Ren, so you might as well keep him in the trash. After this point, a lot of people mentally checked out of the game, and I can't blame them. This twist derails any investment you had in the original ideas and setting this game was building so far. But personally, this wasn't the moment that broke me. I believe that there are three big sins that this game commits. Xeno was the first one, and there are two more to discuss later on. The second is coming up shortly, and that is the one that broke me and caused me to lose so much faith in this game. Leon travels to Raccoon City, and I have so many thoughts on the matter that I don't even know where to start. This game wants to give Leon a character arc where he learns how to get over his survivor's guilt, which is all fine and dandy unless you remember that that was what RE4 Remake was about. Leon is put to the test by not only Sadler and his cronies, but also by Luis. The outcome of RE4 is pretty much the same as 2, with Leon only being able to save 2 people from the chaos. The difference was that this time, Leon was able to learn from Luis that despite not being able to save everyone, his presence ultimately leads to more good than bad. And despite what he may feel, he knows that like Luis, he has to do the right thing and try to save as many people as he can. Luis saw that he could only help Leon and Ashley after all the bad he'd done, which inadvertently led to the undoing of the evil Luis was responsible for bringing into the world. Even if it's only a few people, Leon should try the best he can to save as many lives as possible, like he was trying to do at the beginning of RE2. While a bit tacky and not the fault of Formake, you could understand how and why Leon lost his optimistic, bright-eyed persona off-screen. And RE4R admirably tries to tell a story about Leon gaining the hopefulness as dressing to the unflinching events of the original. It's not perfect and is springing off of 21-year-old material, but it's probably my favorite Resi plot to date. So why would you have Leon undergo the same character arc again? In every cutscene in Raccoon City, Leon is framing the situation as a second chance, and a way to prove that he can save people and redeem himself, which we just saw him getting over less than 3 years ago. Why even bring Leon back if you're going to regress it? If you needed a Raccoon City survivor to go on a quest through it, why not use Claire or Sherry or Ada? I mean, I know the reason is money. I gotta say, it's really bold to intersplice cutscenes directly taken from a better game. I'm not one who has experienced survivor's guilt before, so take the following with some salt. But I find it so gross that this game is saying that the only way to get over survivor's guilt is to do something specifically related to that trauma in a grand act of heroism. Maybe someone else got something out of this that really made them feel seen, but this just made me feel sick. In 2026, there's more of a precedent for gamers to search out old titles and play them for the first time with the accessibility of the internet. After RE7 and especially RE2R came out, a lot of people went back to the old games, or just played the remakes, and were able to discover titles that were meant for generations before them. We all don't like what was done with Remake, but maybe it was for the best so people would feel like they're missing out and fire up an emulator and get the original 99 game running, at least before Nemesis was released on Steam. And the character that's most prominent between all these games, and is in most of the highly received ones, is Leon. It not only makes sense to have the original 2026 RE entry be self-referential, but also to have Leon be one of the main characters. But like Xeno, the game neglects to do anything interesting with him. He doesn't feel like a character. He feels like an action figure that plays elusive quotes if you push a button on his back. Alright, but who cares about the story in a Resident Evil game? We only care about the gameplay, so how is that gameplay? This is a section of the script that I really had to rack my brain to figure out. I knew that Leon's gameplay felt worse compared to Formake, but figuring out why really tested me. The long and short of it is that it feels mindless and I don't like it, so if I get sloppy with my words, I just want to make clear what I'm trying to articulate as a whole. I think I've pinpointed 3 reasons that maybe individually wouldn't be a problem for a previous incarnation of Leon, but altogether I think make Leon feel terrible to play. Reason number 1. The zombies are boring and don't respond to your attacks. When the series shifted from horror to action back in 2005, they recognized that having the amount of bullets it would take to stun enemies being untelegraphed would be frustrating to players. So unless a zombie was a unique or especially strong enemy type like Dr. Salvador, shooting them would always elicit some kind of reaction. When Resi went back to horror with RE7 and RE2R, it was logical that these games would return to the invisible stun values that the series originated with. But for RE4R, someone forgot to get rid of the random stun values. You could shoot a Ganado in the head and there was a chance it just wouldn't crit and you'd lose the iframes you needed. While noticeable and definitely making the game worse, it wasn't that bad. With the inclusion of flash grenades and guns like the upgraded Matilda, there were ways to circumvent this and guarantee yourself a stun. But with RE9 it is that bad. It's more common for an enemy to die from a bullet than a roundhouse kick. What's the point of giving Leon all these cool melee moves and unique animations if I barely ever get to use them? Enemies aren't even as aggressive as they were in Formake, so there's not even really a hankering to swoop into the invincibility of melee moves, unless you want the small serotonin of getting to see Leon kick a zombie in the face. When you get to Raccoon City, it's even worse. One of the coolest things about Leon's combat in the beginning sections of the game is seeing the ways enemies fall apart under pressure. It's like seeing your combat story on the enemy's face. And then you get to Raccoon City, and because they're already so dry, the only effect you can observe is patches of blood. I thought the satisfaction of facing off against the Walking Dead was how they are undead. You can get an interpretation of these zombies' lives from before they turn. Meanwhile, these guys are so far gone they might as well have been made in a lab. That's before we fight literal lab zombies. It's hard to articulate, but the zombies in previous games felt like respectable opponents. Like they really had a chance of taking you down. When you defeated one, it felt like you were defeating a conscious adversary, and not just some mob to mow down like in RE9. This is probably my most subjective opinion in this section, but I'm curious if you feel the same way. Okay, this might actually be the most subjective opinion here, but I'll keep it brief. So many of the guns in Leon's kit feel awful, no matter what difficulty you're on. Their effect on enemies feels super minimal, as I just said, especially the handguns and non-clatter carbine machine guns. You're only going to get consistent results from the shotgun, sniper rifles, and Requiem, making most enemy encounters feel repetitive because you're not pushed into using different weapons all too often. What's really peculiar to me are the sound effects used for these weapons. The audio sounds so much worse than it did in RE4R. have been fine just reusing the sounds from Formake if this was all that could be crafted. Reason number 3, and what I think is the biggest one, resource management is completely absent in Leon's campaign. The thing that set RE4 apart from other shooters at the time was how it carried over the resource management and limited resources and rationing from previous RE titles. There's a reason why in Devil May Cry, Dante doesn't have to reload his guns, but Leon does. When RE5, and especially RE6, made ammo and resources feel very extraneous, it was able to distract from that with dazzling unique environments and a plethora of enemies. RE9 gives Leon all the tools and abilities RE6 Leon had, but puts him in rooms with enemies that feel like ones from the horror side of RE. Enemies behave very similarly to the ones at the beginning of the game with Grace, and that was fine there because Grace had a very limited moveset. Leon gets so many tools and resources to play around with, yet enemies are so static and binary in their truculence, and there's no weight to making decisions with him. Which is so strange to me, because I thought that was what Village and Formake were for, so the modern Capcom teams could relearn how to do action horror. A lot of this video so far has been me milking the Village and Formake cows, which I'm a bit sorry about. They're my second and third favorite games in the series respectively, and for good reason. You probably needn't ask what number 1 is. I think they had a good variety of combat scenarios and enemies for their leads to fight through. So why does RE9 feel like all the magic was lost only 5 years later? Village and Formake didn't have as interesting levels or ideas as games like the original RE4. You can especially see that with Formake, the way some of the new sections butt up against the old ones. But I would argue that despite that, these sections still put Leon through tense and claustrophobic situations where your choices mattered. And when Formake had a piece of level that was really good, it was really good. This level of quality is mostly absent in RE9. Notice I say mostly, because weirdly enough, there are actually a few scenarios that are decently interesting. I mentioned the opening pursuit with Leon in the street, but the fight in the rehabilitation ward isn't half bad, and the sniper section on the roof and the fight with the Blisterborn in the church are great, especially when factoring in a fun trick the game throws in on insanity. So there are some inspired combat scenarios for Leon, but, and you're probably sick of me saying this already, they all disappear once you reach the second half. If you pretend to play like you're in a game where you need to consider resources, you're going to run into some frustration with enemies not responding well to your weaker guns and melee attacks. And if you play like it's a more action-y resi romp, then you're going to feel like you're playing a Resident Evil Dynasty Warriors spin-off the way enemies have no personality or agency. All the things I just listed weren't problems in the earlier Leon segments because they were so short that it was hard to notice a lot of the cut corners, as well as the fact that the playstyle where you just go full postal feels more appropriate in between Grace's stealthy gameplay. To abandon what felt like a deliberate choice in pacing and tone is very strange to me. Even more strange is that it seems like every conscious design decision that could have been made to make the 4 hours of Leon drag was made. I don't know why the second thing Leon does upon returning to Raccoon City is go on an extended fetch quest, and then go on several fetch quests within that fetch quest. Every RE has fetch quests. You could argue that every RE game is a series of fetch quests. But those games were able to disguise these with interesting locations to explore, or really interesting items to collect. It felt like you were finding a little bit more about this place when you got a new item. But how much is there to learn when exploring a place you've not only been before, but one that hasn't had life in it for 28 years? The answer is not much. Some barren BSAA camps were all that was added between 1998 and 2026. Actually, why are there no treasures for Leon to collect in this game? Why only tracking modules? Treasure hunting is legitimately one of the best innovations in RE4 Remake. The fact that it's absent here is shocking and makes the game feel really cheap. Well, not just that, but the exclusion of treasures certainly doesn't help. I mentioned how the enemies in Raccoon City have the same variety as Grace's enemies, but even if you can get beyond their sameness, they still can't get right the fundamentals that were learnt all the way back in 2005. Their color palette blends into the gray wasteland. They don't even have red eyes for you to identify in the dark, nor a distinct noise that they make when they've identified you or if you're near them. It seems like Capcom doesn't know how to make interesting set pieces for Leon, which is so strange to me because Village had pretty decent set pieces. A room filled with blood that enemies can hide in, trying to get the skylight to open up on one of the vampire daughters, a giant monster that flies around and destroys the terrain, creating platforms for yourself to get over a lake, pretty much everything in the factory. The most interesting bit of Raccoon City is when you're on a leaning building and have to shoot window panes below faraway enemies to make them fall down. Like, what's the choice here? Use 1 bullet or 3 bullets? You might assume that all the things I just described were the second sin I mentioned earlier. No, actually. It's something that's probably quite petty and that I haven't seen other people bring up, at least with the same enmity that I have. It's the weapon upgrade menu. I'm not joking. Going inside the BSAA camp and opening up this loot crate, and seeing that this was going to be the menu for getting upgrades, seriously broke me. It looks like a Call of Duty menu, the kind of menu that can be used for any game that allows you to upgrade guns. I'm pretty sure they just found this menu on the cutting room floor for one of their live service games and decided to repurpose it. And Leon getting this wristband that tracks his kill count and gives him credits to convert into upgrades makes no sense. Where did this thing come from? Why did the BSAA lock better guns behind performance from their soldiers? How does the supply box even upgrade your weapons? When nothing cool comes from the end result, I start questioning how we got here. If this game is going to pander so terribly to the point of bringing Wesker back, have the player return to Raccoon City, bring a new tyrant to fight, and have Gideon turn into Nemesis at the end, then you might as well bring back the Merchant. After Village seems so giddy to have a weapons dealer for our player to go to, giving them tons of dialogue, neglecting to include one in RE9 feels lazy. After a 2.5 hour stretch of discovering all the different shades of gray, we have something that I actually really liked. The idea of let people enjoy things has really ruined a lot of critique when it comes to art, especially games. It shuts down any discussion and potential rebuttal that comes from sharing something you've made or something you like. I believe that people should be allowed to like what they like, but I also believe that if you don't want to accept any criticism when it comes to the things you like, you probably shouldn't be watching a video critiquing the game you like. However, if after 40 odd minutes of me discussing this game's issues, you think that I'm some kind of narc, I have evidence against that, because I loved the bike ride with Leon. Whenever an action game has a gimmick segment like this, I can't help but roll my eyes, because they usually have nothing to do with the core gameplay and really drag on. But because of the spectacle Capcom is able to provide and the brevity of this section, I was really happy playing it for a second, third, and fourth time. I can barely stand playing stuff like this the first time, so for it to still hold up on multiple replays is a marvel. This was also the moment I was totally sold on Gideon as a villain. Seeing him on a motorcycle firing RPGs at you, I felt like I was resurrected after nearly being put to sleep the past 2 hours. I think you could just cut out the entire detonator section and nothing would be lost. The game also looks really great in this section. I complained about how bad Raccoon City looked before, but when all the mushy gray textures are flying by you, it's hard to complain. You enter the RPD where Leon has to do another fetch quest that's just a repeat of what you had to do in RE2. Not only that, but this might be the densest bit of pandering in the whole game, having a bunch of memos from former STARS members lying around upstairs. How'd this stuff even get here? Who knows? Then after this, you get the orphanage section. I'm not even going to waste time on this section because I'm pretty sure even the people who like this game don't like this section. It's every restrictive horror segment from previous games, but with 100% more weighting. So let's just move on to another minor positive. The return of Mr. X is okay, on paper at least. I think there was an opportunity to show how much Leon has grown here, where instead of having to run from Mr. X, he takes him head on, and you think we'd get to see that. But once you fight him outside the RPD, his presence starts to drag and the novelty wears off. The fight isn't interesting or all that different from the 2-make fight to feel like anything more than a cheap attempt at nostalgia for a game that came out 7 years ago. And after that fight, you get the Plant 43 fight, which also gave me a sense of deja vu from an early 2019 Capcom release, except it's not a Resident Evil game. I've never liked the clean white lab aesthetic that 2-make took over the original's dirty maximalism. Not only does it look better and more unique, but it feels like the kind of palette a secret underground facility would take. It's not a place that's meant to be shown off, so why bother keeping it so tidy? So is it any shock that I don't like the arc? It's just a more extreme version of the Umbrella Underground Laboratory from 2-make. It asks the stupid question of what if there was a bigger, secreter lab underneath Raccoon City? What visual difference is there between Ark and the Umbrella Underground Laboratory that makes the Ark look like anything more than an annex to the original labs? A few skeleton models, a few yellow rooms, it's not much. Anyway, we've reached our next and final big sin for this game, the Elite Guard fight. In the context of the game, this isn't that offensive. It's the kind of normal bad encounter you've experienced in Raccoon City so far. These enemies have the intelligence of regular zombies, but extreme kill power and range, so they're either going to be really frustrating to fight or die instantly. The thing that grinds my gears about this part of the game is how it unrests an assurance that we've had about the RE team. Early 2010s, Capcom famously was under a lot of mismanagement, with the executives wanting to try and make games that either had global appeal or specifically Western appeal. This led to releases like DMC Devil May Cry and, of course, Resident Evil 6. In an attempt to emulate the Call of Duty series and other first-person shooters, Resi 6 and the spin-offs surrounding it dropped the survival horror elements in favor of elements most common in FPS fare: less resource management, and more multiplayer modes and combat options. Capcom still makes sloppy multiplayer trite, but I and many others were under the impression that the decision to make these games weren't out of love for the genre or the series, but rather to fill out a checklist given by a CEO. If Capcom wanted to make their compelling and single-player driven horror games, they would have to make a few sloppy live service titles. However, that's the key here. Capcom never wanted to make these live service cash grabs. They were always a necessity rather than a desire, which is why it was so shocking to play RE9 for the first time and watch the game turn into a hackneyed cover shooter. I thought that you thought that we came to Resident Evil to play Resident Evil and nothing else. Why are you trying to do this stuff? I don't understand, unless you're trying to paste over the game with stuff left over from previous projects. Okay, after that we have another minor positive, the Hunk fight. Yes, it gives fan fiction. Yes, it's just reusing the Krauser AI from Formake, but I like fighting Krauser, and I like Hunk, so I think this gets a pass. It reminded me that this company has some of the best animators in the business currently. This fight also might be my favorite looking part of the game. The ruby-colored room against the two black silhouettes of Leon and Hunk look great, and it's easy to interpret in the middle of the action. After another cutscene where Grace finally splits up from Zeno... Oh my god, you play as Grace in this game! By the end of the Raccoon City excursion, I legitimately forgot that this started as a Grace video game, so I was thrilled to be able to return to her. However, this couldn't clear the bad taste in my mouth after so much sloppy Leon content. Grace's segment here reminds me a lot of the final stretches of previous RE games. More linear, closed-off area where you have to deter a bunch of enemies. But the problem of this scenario in this game is so obvious that I barely need to mention it. All your investment and instinct you've put into Grace's playstyle at the beginning has completely eroded after so much Leon. Not only that, but once again, the Ark isn't an interesting location to explore. And I think I can say that I'm officially sick of the Lickers. They worked in the RPD because you have to find a way to balance your volume and keeping them from inflicting large amounts of damage on you, alongside avoiding the relentless Mr. X. But once you got to the laboratory, there was no Mr. X, and they just became essentially a walking segment each time you wanted to go to an area that was between you and them. That's doubly true here, because unlike 2Make, this game has already stooped to so much pandering that throwing in the Lickers doesn't feel like anything more than a distraction from the tackiness here. I'm sure if they had the time, they'd drop a regenerator in here too. It's hard to shake this inauthenticity when playing Grace's segment here. Like I'm supposed to feel the same fear that I did when playing as her before. After so much mindless action, after what felt like a delicately paced first half, I can't help but wonder why the decision to split the game up like this was made. It can't have been on purpose, right? The actions you took as Leon feel so disconnected from Grace that it feels like you've wasted your time. The game starts with Grace trying to escape a creepy hospital, and ends with Leon blowing the head off a Cronenbergian cove. Oh, well, time to talk about that ending. I don't have a problem with Spencer doing a face turn and becoming a remorseful old man looking to right his wrongs, though it is a bit odd that he chose to hide away the cure to every problem the world has had and just not tell anybody about it. Maybe Elpis could have been useful when all that shit was going down in RE6. But what really confuses me is Victor's response to this information. He sees this as an invitation to chaos rather than a means to amend.
We wanted a weapon.
Instead, Spencer gave us anarchy!
I mean, I get using the virus to upset the world's balance and make it so only you have access to BOWs, but what's with this whole anarchy thing?
Anarchy!
What does his line even mean? What does Victor want now? I thought he was just a mad scientist and wanted his hands on Elpis because it would help with his experiments and stuff. Why not just mass produce Elpis and then sell them so you can get all the money you need for your experimental therapies?
Anarchy!
Okay, well, fine then. Gideon had this slight snake theme going on with him wearing a snakeskin coat, and after having Leon fight two bosses that were references to RE1, wouldn't it make sense to include a snake boss to fill out the roster of references? Instead of Victor just becoming a Nemesis and reusing bits of the design that Nemesis had at the end of 3Make? For a franchise where apparently story doesn't matter, every RE game has done an excellent job when it comes to their climaxes and endings. Think about the original RE4. That game's story is a total nothing burger. But by the time you reach Sadler, you're still pumped to take him down and make a dashing escape. These games are really good at finding ways to make their final bosses quickly compelling and make you amped to fight them. I think Gideon doesn't work because there was no hint of him surviving his tumble off the highways, so you've thrown away pretty much all of your investment in him up until his sudden return. Now that Zeno's taken up the main villain role, it makes sense to do away with Gideon, but I guess that was on me for expecting RE9 to make sensible choices. The game starts with Grace, but ends with Leon. It doesn't feel like these two characters share screen time fairly anymore. Grace contributes zilch to this final showdown, and you forget she was a main character. The two's relationship didn't amount to really anything by the end. Both Grace and especially Leon feel the same characters they were at the start. How did their relationship with each other change them for the better, for the worse? This isn't a rhetorical question. I genuinely don't know what the story was supposed to amount to besides some meager reflections on survivor's guilt and trauma. And while yes, it's been a running problem for all the recent Resident Evil games, but Who wants to see a freakish transformation into a Cronenbergian monster? You know that incredible animation work we've been showing off this whole game? Perhaps the coolest one to see just happens off screen. Like I said, this has been a common issue with all recent RE games, but it's more offensive to me here because of how out of the blue Gideon transforming into Nemesis is.
Time to bury Lowe's last skeleton.
Umbrella has been brought to its knees so many times that by this point, hearing Leon say this line feels incredibly hollow. What's stopping another one of Umbrella's scientists from rising from its ashes and becoming another global threat? Nothing. And maybe that would be okay if the gameplay didn't have to suffer for the story. Alright, so that's it for the main game. Now it's time to talk about the post-game content. At least the bits that you don't have to pay for, the stuff that you get on the disc. Starting with Insanity Mode, which was a bit of a disappointment to me. I'm someone who believes that most games are better when they're more difficult, and that most of the time playing on the highest available default difficulty makes for a better experience because you'll have to think about the combat and engage in the mechanics more if you want to succeed. Insanity Mode does that a little bit, but not enough to keep my attention, and consider it a proper addition to the game. It's so much more difficult than the defaults that I can feel like a joke at times. However, not in the ways that are actually important. I was expecting parts like the basement and Grace's exploration of the Ark to be maddeningly difficult, but they pretty much weren't any trouble. By the end of the whole thing, I had so much handgun ammo, Grace probably could have rocked up to Gideon herself. Meanwhile, parts like the water treatment plant were memorable for all the wrong reasons. You get about the same amount of Requiem ammo as you did before, but now the goat takes 2 shots to stun and can one-tap you. The encounter goes from disappointing to frustrating. Leon's combat is made a little better now that enemies are a little more tanky and don't just fall at your feet, but it still doesn't feel designed to compensate for so much ammo being at your disposal. Overall, the mode doesn't live up to the name. It's definitely the definitive way to play the game, but the idea that you'll probably have to play the game at least twice to unlock the mode itself, and the bonus weapons like Freya's Needle and the Clatter Carbine, makes booting up a new profile and a new copy very unappealing. Alright, next bit of extra content. Nothing. Okay, so this next bit, my bias for certain games in the series might seriously start to show, because by all accounts, Requiem has the exact same density of content and features as launch RE7. A lopsided campaign with another difficulty to go through that switches things up for taxation and mandates typewriters. But that also sucked. We now live in a time where the gold edition of RE7 costs $40, 10 less than what the game launched with and with substantially more content. That was probably just making the best of a bad situation, and I don't like the idea of making a mediocre main campaign more digestible with some fun extras. I definitely prefer the village approach of a great campaign with some half-baked extras. Not to say that we shouldn't have both, but I'm never paying for mercenaries or the ghost survivors when I'm buying into these. I'm paying for a great survival horror game. Like RE7, RE9 gave us neither on release, and only time will tell if Capcom is willing to pick up the pieces. After the shoddy Winters expansion, I'm unsure whether or not Capcom can find the motivation to make anything more than a cash grab for the DLCs, or time grab in the case of Mercenaries. I don't like to be redundant. The reason this video exists is because I believe that I had unique things to say about this game and I want to share them. So why am I repeating a point that if you are on the internet for RE, you've probably heard? As of the time of writing, Resident Evil Requiem is the best-selling game of 2026 in the US, and in only 2 months became one of the best-selling Resident Evil games of all time in the US. I'm not going to pretend like that isn't incredible, and I'm not so much of a Grinch that I will bemoan it topping Gun and Ball slot. But Resident Evil isn't the face of the survival horror genre anymore. It is an uncontestable member of the list of biggest gaming franchises at the moment. I think it's fair to ask for more from this company, now that they can expect a return on their investment. I guess that sounds like the conclusion to this video, but it's not. I think at the end I have to ask the question, what was the point of this game? It seemed like the idea behind Requiem was to bridge the gap between the pure horror and pure action parts of the series. A game that combines the best of the franchise in one package to create the ultimate Resident Evil game, a celebration of everything that came before. You probably already know my opinion on this. Even if Grace and Leon's bits were the best or even up to a similar standard as the rest of the series, I don't think it would work. The segments you play as each of them are either too short or too long to settle into a specific mood and be able to take their style seriously. This could have been alleviated by having meatier, more evenly spread chunks of gameplay shared between the two characters throughout the runtime, but there's still another problem after that. Leon and Grace do not talk to each other gameplay or inventory-wise. They have entirely different economies to their name. I mentioned before how much your investment in either Grace or Leon gets repeatedly overturned, even more so by this lack of cohesion. Replays are a slog because every time you switch to another perspective, you're wondering why there's even this kind of switching unless it's some slipshod attempt at variety. It's like if you played the campaigns in RE6 in chronological order, it's maddeningly pointless. If Capcom didn't want to bother trying to find a middle ground in a single campaign and just wanted to do both extremes at different intervals, maybe it could have worked. I could speculate on ways that this concept could have been executed better, but I might as well just make an RE10 pitch video at that point. A game like RE9 relies on the past too much to be worthy of the next numbered entry in this series. The elements that made previous RE games special are here, yet in decayed form. I praised elements like the Blood Collector greatly in the beginning, but it butts up against the rest of the game being so unoriginal. When a series like Resident Evil has such a rich history of innovation, you can't just look back on it. If RE9 wanted to pay tribute to its predecessors, it would be the revolutionary step the franchise deserves with each entry, rather than just a requiem for what came before. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't subscribe. I don't expect to talk about anything Resident Evil again. This was probably a one-time thing. I may make other videos on Devil May Cry and Wonder Woman. However, this thing took way too long, so don't expect to see those videos for 4 years. So see you then.